My brother stared straight into my eyes and swore our family restaurant was bleeding cash. He insisted that if I did not sign the transfer papers right then, everything Dad left us would vanish. I nearly believed him. However, one single figure in his report made me freeze. My decision to put the pen down that afternoon exposed a lie he had orchestrated for years to ruin me. My name is Ashlyn Jordan. I am 35 years old, and for the last 8 years, I have worked as in-house legal counsel for a massive logistics conglomerate in Chicago. My entire career is built on the premise of skepticism. I read contracts that are hundreds of pages long, hunting for the single clause that could cost my company millions. I am paid to be the person who does not trust anyone, the person who spots the trap before the steel jaws snap shut. Yet, as I sat in the cramped, windowless office at the back of the Jordan Oak, the restaurant my father had built from the ground up, I felt my professional instincts fighting a losing war against a lifetime of family loyalty. The drive down had been a blur. I had covered the distance in under 4 hours, ignoring speed limits because the voicemail from my brother, Gavin, had sounded like a man standing on the edge of a cliff. He had not given details, only a breathless command to get home because we were about to lose everything. Now that I was here, the reality seemed even more suffocating than his voice had implied. Gavin was pacing the small strip of worn linoleum between the heavy metal desk and the filing cabinets. He looked terrible. He is only 2 years older than me, but in that harsh fluorescent light, he looked 10 years my senior. His hair was thinning, his shirt was untucked at the side, and there was a frantic, manic energy in his eyes that I had never seen before. Sitting in the guest chair was his wife, Tara. She had her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her knuckles white, staring at me with an expression that sat somewhere between pity and accusation. "Ashlyn, you have to understand. We do not have time to debate this," Gavin said, his voice cracking. He slammed a thick binder onto the desk in front of me. Dust motes danced in the air from the impact. The binder was labeled with the current fiscal year in black marker. I reached out and opened it. My fingers felt cold. The pages were covered in spreadsheets, profit and loss statements, and balance sheets that seemed to bleed red ink. "We are hemorrhaging money, Ashlyn," Gavin continued, resuming his pacing. He wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "Since Dad died, the market has shifted. The cost of goods has skyrocketed. We are paying 20% more for beef than we were 6 months ago. The labor costs are up 15%. The overhead is eating us alive. I tried to shield you from it because I know you are busy with your big city career, but I cannot hold back the dam anymore." I looked down at the numbers. Negative $4,000 in January, negative $7,000 in February. The losses seemed to accelerate as the months went on. It was a terrifying downward spiral. "How did it get this bad this fast?" I asked, my voice steady despite the knot forming in my stomach. I scanned the columns. "Why didn't you tell me 6 months ago?" "Gavin, we could have restructured. We could have looked at marketing." "We tried everything," Tara interjected, her voice shrill. She leaned forward, her eyes pleading. "Gavin has been working 80 hours a week. Ashlyn, he is here before the sun comes up and he leaves after midnight. He has tried every supplier, every menu change. It is just not working. The town is changing. People are not eating out like they used to." Gavin stopped pacing and leaned over the desk, placing both hands on the wood. He looked me dead in the eye. "The bank is calling in the loans. Ash, they gave us a deadline. If we do not restructure the ownership by tomorrow morning to show a consolidated management strategy for a bankruptcy filing or a distress sale, they are going to seize the assets. They will take the building. They will take the land. They will come after Dad's estate." I felt a chill run down my spine. Dad's estate. The house our mother was still living in technically fell under the umbrella of the family trust that owned the restaurant. "Are you saying Mom could lose the house?" I asked, the lawyer in me suddenly replaced by the terrified daughter. "That is exactly what I'm saying," Gavin said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Unless we cut the bleeding, I found a buyer who is willing to take on the debt, but they want a clean title. They do not want to deal with 2 owners. especially one who is an absentee partner living 2 states away. They want to buy the LLC, strip the assets, and cover the liabilities, but I need full authority to sign the deal. Today. He slid a document across the desk. It was already prepared. A stock transfer agreement. It stated that I, Ashlyn Jordan, was voluntarily transferring my 50% stake in the Jordan Oak to Gavin Jordan for the nominal sum of $1, granting him sole power of attorney over the business affairs to settle outstanding debts. $1? It was not about the money. I made a good salary. I did not need the restaurant's income, but this place was Dad's soul. He had spent 40 years greeting customers at the door. The idea of selling it for scrap, of letting some faceless investment group tear it down to build a strip mall, broke my heart. Is there no other way? I asked, picking up the pen but not uncapping it. Can't we infuse capital? I have savings. Gavin, I can wire $50,000 right now if it buys us time. $50,000 won't even cover the vendor debts for the last quarter, Gavin shouted, then immediately recoiled, lowering his voice. Look, I appreciate it. Ash, I do, but this hole is too deep. If you throw your money in, you are just setting it on fire. You are the smart one, right? You are the corporate lawyer. You know when to cut losses. Do not let sentimentality ruin Mom's future. Tara reached out and placed her hand over mine. Her palm was damp. Ashlyn, please, she said softly. We are doing this for the family. Gavin is trying to save us from public humiliation. Imagine if the bank comes and puts a foreclosure sign on the lawn. Imagine the neighbors talking. Dad's legacy deserves a dignified end, not a sheriff's sale. I looked at the document again. The legal language was standard, but the urgency felt manufactured. In my line of work, whenever someone told me I had to sign something right now, or the world would end, it usually meant someone was lying. But this was Gavin. This was the boy who had taught me how to ride a bike. This was the man who had held my hand at Dad's funeral while we both wept. Why would he lie? What did he have to gain? If the ship was sinking, he was just trying to get me into the lifeboat before the suction dragged me down. Gavin, I said, looking up at him, who drafted this? A buddy of mine from college, he said quickly. He does bankruptcy law. He did it as a favor. He said if we get this signed and notarized by 5 this afternoon, he can file the motion to stall the bank. I glanced at the clock on the wall. It was already 3:45 in the afternoon. I need to read the financials more closely, I said, hesitating. We don't have time for a due diligence audit. Ashlyn, Gavin snapped, his face flushing red. This isn't one of your billion-dollar mergers. This is real life. This is our survival. Do you trust me or not? That was the weaponized question, the ultimate silencer. Of course I trust you, I said. Then sign the papers, he urged. Let me take the fall for this. Let me handle the mess. You go back to Chicago. Keep your hands clean, and let me protect Mom. That is what Dad would have wanted. As the big brother, it is my job to take the hit. I looked at his eyes. They were wide, desperate, pleading. I uncapped the pen. The ink tip hovered over the signature line. The room felt incredibly small, the air thick with the smell of old paper and anxiety. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator compressor in the next room, a heartbeat that was struggling to keep going. I thought about my father. I thought about the pride he had when he gave us the keys. And now, I was about to sign it all away for a single dollar to stop a hemorrhage I had not even known existed until 2 hours ago. Just sign it, Ash, Gavin whispered. It is the only way out. I pressed the pen to the paper. The black ink made a small dot on the white page. I began to form the loop of the letter A. But then, my eyes drifted up to the financial report lying open next to my arm. It was open to the expense category for maintenance and repairs. A single line item caught my eye. Roof repair, $12,000. Date, October 14th. I stopped writing. October 14th. I remembered that week vividly. It was the week Mom had come to visit me in Chicago. It had rained for 3 days straight here in town. I remembered because I had called the restaurant to check on Gavin, and he had complained that the old roof was holding up surprisingly well despite the storm. He had specifically told me, "Not a single leak. Ash, Dad built this place like a tank." If the roof was fine in the middle of a storm, why was there a $12,000 invoice for a repair the very same week? My hand froze. The pen remained on the paper, but I did not finish my name. "What is it?" Gavin asked, his voice tight. "Why did you stop?" I stared at that number, $12,000. In the grand scheme of the hundreds of thousands he claimed we were losing, it was a speck of dust. But to a lawyer, a speck of dust is where the crack in the windshield begins. "Ashlyn?" Tara said, her voice rising in panic. "We are running out of time." I slowly lifted the pen from the paper. I capped it with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. "I need to use the restroom," I said, standing up abruptly. "What, now?" Gavin looked like he was about to explode. "Ashlyn, just sign the damn paper." "I need a moment. Gavin," I said, my voice hardening into the tone I used when a boardroom negotiation was going south. I felt a sudden, cold clarity washing over the panic. I am not signing anything until I splash some water on my face. I did not wait for his permission. I turned and walked out of the office, clutching my purse. I left the contract on the desk, unsigned. As I closed the door behind me, I heard Gavin slam his hand against the metal cabinet, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage. I walked into the narrow hallway, my heart hammering against my ribs, not out of fear for the bank, but out of a sudden, terrifying realization that the man in that office was not the brother I thought I knew. I did not go to the restroom. Instead, I walked straight out the back exit into the cool evening air, took a deep breath, and unlocked my car. I was not leaving, but I was definitely not signing. Not until I found out why a perfect roof cost $12,000 to fix. I checked into a nondescript motel on the outskirts of town, well away from the prying eyes of the neighbors and the suffocating guilt trips of my family. I had taken the binder with me when I walked out. It was theft, technically, but I considered it preserving evidence. The neon sign outside flickered with a rhythmic buzzing sound that grated on my nerves. But it was better than the silence of my childhood bedroom, where every corner held a memory that Gavin was currently trying to pawn off for $1. I sat cross-legged on the stiff mattress, spreading the documents out in a fan shape around me. I brewed a cup of terrible motel coffee and began to do what I did best. I stopped being a sister, and I became an auditor. In my line of work, fraud usually has a specific texture. It feels too clean. Real business is messy. Real profit and loss statements have jagged edges. A bad week due to a snowstorm. A spike in revenue because of a local festival. A sudden drop because a freezer broke. Life is volatile, and financial records should reflect that volatility. But as I ran my finger down the columns of Gavin's report, I felt a distinct lack of friction. The numbers were smooth, too smooth. For the last 6 months, the cost of goods sold had held steady at exactly 32% of the gross revenue, not 31.5, not 32.8. It hovered right at 32 with a variance that was statistically improbable. It was as if someone had started with the revenue number and worked backward to calculate the expenses, rather than letting the expenses occur naturally. It was a formula, not a record. I flipped to the section on vendor payments. There was a dramatic increase in the cost of linens and laundry services starting in February. According to this, we were spending $4,000 a month on tablecloths and napkins. I closed my eyes and did the mental math. That was enough to buy brand new high thread count linens for the entire dining room every single week. Unless the customers were eating the napkins, there was no physical way a restaurant of our size could burn through that much fabric. I needed a reality check. The numbers said we were a ghost town, bleeding cash because nobody was coming in. I opened my laptop and pulled up the social media pages for the Jordan Oak. If Gavin was right, the digital footprint should be a wasteland. It was not. I scrolled through Instagram, searching for the location tag. The feed was full of photos from last weekend. I saw plates of our signature ribeye, groups of smiling teenagers crowded into booths, and a line of people waiting in the foyer. I clicked on a review posted just 2 days ago on a popular travel site. Best prime rib in the state, but make a reservation. We had to wait 45 minutes for a table on a Tuesday night. Worth the wait. 5 stars. My heart hammered against my ribs. You do not have a 45-minute wait on a Tuesday if you are on the brink of bankruptcy. You do not hemorrhage money when every seat is full. The revenue side of Gavin's spreadsheet showed a steady decline, yet the photographic evidence showed a bustling business. Where was the money going? I needed to talk to someone who was on the ground, but it could not be Gavin, and it certainly could not be Tara. I scrolled through my phone contacts until I found a number I had not dialed in over a year. Sarah Miller. She had been the floor manager for a decade. Dad loved her like a second daughter. She was honest to a fault and knew the rhythm of the restaurant better than anyone, but I noticed she was not mentioned in the current payroll report I had just analyzed. I hit dial. It rang 4 times, and I was about to hang up when a hesitant voice answered. Hello? Sarah. It is Ashlyn Jordan, I said, keeping my voice low. There was a long pause. Oh, hi, Ashlyn. I heard you were in town. You did? Small town news travels faster than light, she said, but her tone was guarded. She did not sound like the warm, bubbly woman I remembered. She sounded tired and wary. Sarah, I am looking at the books, I said, deciding to skip the pleasantries. Gavin told me the restaurant is failing. He says we are drowning, but I'm looking at photos online, and the place looks packed. I see you are not on the payroll anymore. What happened? I heard her sigh, a heavy, ragged sound on the other end of the line. I was let go 3 months ago. Ashlyn, Gavin said they needed to cut overhead. He replaced me with Tara's younger cousin. But the business? I pressed. Was it slow when you left? Slow? Sarah let out a short, bitter laugh. Ashlyn, we were doing record numbers in December. The holiday parties were back to back. But then, things started getting weird in the kitchen. Weird how? I grabbed a pen and a notepad from the nightstand. Gavin switched vendors. He stopped buying from the local cattle ranch your dad used for 20 years. Said they were too expensive. He started bringing in meat from some distributor I had never heard of. The boxes were generic. The quality was noticeably lower, but he kept the menu prices the same. I frowned. If he was buying cheaper meat and charging the same price, the profit margins should have skyrocketed. Yet the report in front of me showed the cost of goods going up, not down. Did he say why? I asked. He said the new distributor was a premium partner. Sarah said, but here's the kicker. I saw one of the invoices on the clipboard in the kitchen before I left. The price per pound on the invoice was double what we used to pay the local rancher. He was buying lower quality meat but paying twice as much for it on paper. When I asked him about it, he fired me 2 days later. My hand gripped the phone tighter. This was it. This was the mechanism. Kickbacks, I whispered. I did not say that, Sarah said quickly, her voice trembling. Look, Ashlyn, I do not want any trouble. Gavin made it clear that if I badmouthed the business, he would make sure I never got a job in this county again. I have 2 kids. Please. I won't use your name. Sarah, I promise. You just confirmed what I needed to know. I hung up and stared at the wall. The picture was coming into focus, and it was uglier than I could have imagined. Gavin was not just failing. He was looting. He was deliberately inflating expenses, buying cheap goods at inflated prices from mysterious vendors, likely vendors that he or Tara controlled or had a deal with. He was siphoning the profit out through the expense column, making the restaurant look poor on paper while he pocketed the difference. If I signed that transfer agreement, I would be handing him the license to bury the evidence forever. He would own the LLC. The losses would be absorbed, and he would suddenly turn the business around in a year, claiming his genius management saved the day. I could not walk back into that office and scream at him. If I confronted him now, he would shred the real invoices. He would delete emails. He would claim Sarah was a disgruntled ex-employee lying out of spite. I needed irrefutable proof. I needed to trace the money from the restaurant's bank account to wherever he was hiding it. I needed a ghost. I opened my laptop again and composed a secure email. I did not send it to my firm. That would raise flags. Instead, I sent it to a private address belonging to a man named Marcus Thorne. Marcus was a forensic accountant I had worked with on a high-stakes embezzlement case 2 years ago. He was expensive. He was terrifyingly thorough. And most importantly, he had zero allegiance to anyone but the person writing his check. Subject: urgent, personal audit, Marcus. I have a situation involving a closely held family entity. Suspected vendor fraud and skimming. I need a deep dive into 5 years of bank records. I need to know who owns the vendors. I need to know where the cash is going. I can pay your retainer immediately. I need you in Vermont by tomorrow morning. Total discretion required. I hit send. Then, I picked up my phone and texted Gavin. I had to play the part of the overwhelmed, emotional sister. I had to buy time. Gavin, I am sorry I walked out. I am just in shock. I feel sick and I'm going to stay at a hotel tonight to clear my head. I cannot look at the papers right now. Let me sleep on it. We can talk tomorrow. His reply came 2 minutes later. Just don't take too long. Ash, the bank is calling me at 9 in the morning. Get some rest. I put the phone down and looked at the report one last time. He thought he was rushing me into a corner. He had no idea that he had just invited a shark into the kiddie pool. I turned off the light, but I did not sleep. I lay there in the dark, listening to the buzzing neon sign, waiting for the sun to rise so I could begin the hunt. Marcus Thorne arrived at my motel door at 7 in the morning, looking completely out of place against the backdrop of peeling paint and rusted vending machines. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my brother's car, and he carried a sleek, aluminum briefcase that looked like it contained nuclear launch codes. He did not ask how I was doing or offer any platitudes about family drama. He simply set up his laptop on the wobbly round table near the window and cracked his knuckles. I handed him the binder Gavin had given me, the one filled with the terrifying red ink. Marcus glanced at it for exactly 3 seconds before sliding it into the trash can next to the desk. "We are not using that," he said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. "That is the story he wants you to read. We are going to read the story the money tells when it thinks no one is looking." I had used my authority as co-executor of my father's estate to grant Marcus digital access to the restaurant's main operating accounts. I expected resistance from the bank, but the authorization had gone through at midnight. Now, the raw data was scrolling across Marcus's screen in endless columns of green text. He worked in silence for 2 hours. The only sound in the room was the rhythmic clicking of his keyboard and the hum of the air conditioner. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching him, feeling like a patient waiting for a diagnosis that I already knew would be terminal. Finally, Marcus stopped typing. He turned the laptop toward me. "Here is your hemorrhage," he said. I leaned in. He had isolated a specific category of outflows labeled as external consulting and support services. I frowned. Dad never hired consultants. He believed if you could not fix a problem with a screwdriver or a handshake, you did not need to fix it. "Look at the dates," Marcus instructed, pointing a manicured finger at the screen. I traced the lines. Every month, on the 15th, there was a transfer of $4,500 to a company called Vertex Management Solutions. Then, on the 18th, another transfer of $3,200 to North Creek Logistics, and on the 22nd, a variable payment ranging from $2,000 to $5,000 went to something called Prism Creative Group. "I have never heard of any of these companies," I said. "That is because they likely do not exist in the physical world," Marcus replied. He opened a new window where he had already pulled up the Secretary of State's corporate registry. He clicked on Vertex Management Solutions. The registered address was a post office box in a strip mall 3 towns over. The registered agent was a lawyer I did not know, but then Marcus clicked on the Incorporation Documents tab. "Look at the signature on the initial filing fee check," Marcus said. The image was grainy, a scanned copy of a check from 4 years ago. I squinted at the signature line. It was scrawled and messy, but the last name was legible. Kessler. "Kessler?" I asked. "Who is Kessler?" Marcus typed rapidly. "Does the name ring a bell? Think hard. Friends from college? Old neighbors? I shook my head. No, wait. My breath hitched. Tara's maiden name is not Kessler, but her mother's maiden name was... Marcus nodded, his face grim. He pulled up another document. North Creek Logistics was registered to an address that, when viewed on a satellite map, turned out to be a vacant lot behind a gas station. But the contact email for the administrative account was gj1980@genericmail.com. Gavin Jordan, born in 1980. It was not a sophisticated hack. It was clumsy. It was arrogant. It was the work of a man who never thought anyone would bother to check, because the only other person with the power to check was his little sister, who lived 500 miles away and trusted him implicitly. It gets worse, Marcus said. He navigated to the third company, Prism Creative Group. Unlike the others, this one had a website. It was a flashy generic landing page offering boutique interior design and event styling. I looked at the invoices Marcus had flagged. Seasonal ambiance consultation, $6,000. Menu design aesthetic review, $4,000. Floral arrangement retainer, $2,500 a month. I felt sick. The restaurant had the same plastic menus it had used for 5 years. The floral arrangements were plastic plants Dad had bought at a wholesale depot a decade ago. We traced the deposit account for Prism Creative Group. It did not go to a business account. It went to a joint personal checking account at a credit union in the next county. Marcus looked at me. Do you want to know who is on that account? I nodded, though I already knew. Tara Jordan, he said. I stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the empty parking lot. My hands were shaking, not from cold, but from a rage so hot it felt like it was burning my skin. They were not just skimming off the top. They were systematically draining the lifeblood of the business. These were not legitimate expenses. This was theft, plain and simple. They were taking tens of thousands of dollars every single month, funneling it into their own pockets, and then recording it as legitimate business expenses. By doing this, they achieved 2 things. First, they got rich. Second, and more sinisterly, they drove the official net income of the restaurant into the ground. By making the restaurant look like it was losing money, they destroyed its valuation. It is a valuation trap, Marcus said, reading my mind. If the restaurant makes $100,000 a year in profit, the business is worth 5 or 6 times that. But if the books show a loss of $50,000 a year, the business is worth 0. Actually, it is worth less than 0. It is a liability. That is why he wants me to sign, I whispered. Exactly. Marcus closed the laptop. If you keep your half, you are legally responsible for half the debts. He has manufactured enough debt to scare you into thinking that giving him your share for $1 is him doing you a favor. He is not asking for charity. Ashlyn, he is tricking you into handing him a gold mine that he has painted to look like a sinkhole. How much? I asked. How much have they taken? Marcus looked at his notes. Going back 3 years, since your father first got sick and Gavin took over full operations, including the vendor kickbacks you suspected and these shell company invoices? He paused, making sure I was ready for the number. $740,000. The room spun. $740,000. That was not just skimming. That was an empire. That was the reason Gavin had a new truck. That was the reason Tara always had designer handbags whenever she came to visit me in Chicago. They had been eating my inheritance, bite by bite, and smiling in my face the entire time. And the worst part was not the money. The worst part was that Gavin had used Dad's illness as his cover, while our father was lying in a hospital bed, worrying about whether his children would be okay. Gavin was already setting up shell companies to rob the legacy Dad built. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, but I wiped it away angrily. We have enough to bury him, Marcus said quietly. This is grand larceny. This is tax fraud. This is a breach of fiduciary duty that would make a judge scream. No, I said, turning back to him. Not yet. Ashlyn, you have the smoking gun. I do not just want the gun. Marcus, I want the confession. I want him to say it. I want him to stand in front of everyone and realize that he is not the smart big brother saving the day. I want him to know that I know. I looked at the phone on the bed. Gavin had texted me again 10 minutes ago. Bank is calling in an hour. Ash, please tell me you are coming to sign. Do it for Dad. Do it for Dad. I picked up the phone and typed a reply. My fingers steady and cold. I am coming. Call a family meeting. I want everyone there so we can settle this once and for all. I grabbed my coat. Get your files. Marcus, I said, we are going to a meeting. The realization hit me not with a bang, but with the terrifying clarity of a judge reading a verdict. Marcus sat back in his chair, the glow of the laptop screen illuminating the sharp angles of his face as he presented the final piece of the puzzle. He had created a second spreadsheet, one that reconstructed the restaurant's finances by stripping away the fraudulent layers Gavin had applied. When he removed the payments to the shell companies, deleted the inflated vendor invoices, and adjusted for the kickbacks, the red ink that had terrified me yesterday vanished. The restaurant was not losing money. It never had been. In fact, according to Marcus's reconstruction, the Jordan Oak was on track to clear a net profit of nearly $200,000 this year alone. That was after paying the staff, buying legitimate supplies, and covering the mortgage. The business was healthy. It was thriving. The only thing bleeding it dry was the parasite sitting in the manager's office. This changes the motive, I said, my voice sounding hollow in the small room. Marcus nodded slowly. He understands how fraud works. It is rarely just about the cash in hand. It is about the asset at the end of the road. Gavin did not just want the $740,000 he had already stolen. That was just the appetizer. The main course was the real estate and the brand itself, by manufacturing a crisis, by painting a picture of a sinking ship. He was manipulating me into abandoning the vessel. I stood up and paced the length of the narrow room, my heels clicking on the cheap laminate floor. The strategy was brilliant in its cruelty. If I signed that transfer agreement, I would cease to be a shareholder. I would lose my legal standing to demand an audit. I would lose my right to inspect the books. The moment I signed my name for that single dollar, Gavin would become the sole owner. He could then, miraculously, turn the business around. He could stop siphoning the money to the shell companies, let the real profits show up on the legitimate books, and claim that his hard work had saved the family legacy. He would look like the hero who rescued Dad's dream, and I would look like the cowardly sister who jumped ship when things got tough. And the fraud? It would be buried forever. As the sole owner, he would have no one to answer to. He could burn the old records, restructure the accounting, and wash his hands clean. He is trying to launder the history of the company, I said, turning back to Marcus. The transfer agreement is the final rinse cycle. Exactly, Marcus replied, closing the laptop with a decisive snap. If you sign, the crime disappears because the victim, you, voluntary, gave up the right to complain. I felt a coldness settle in my chest, displacing the anger. Anger is hot. It is reactive. This was different. This was the icy, calculated detachment I felt before walking into a courtroom. I was no longer a sister dealing with a betrayal. I was a prosecutor preparing a dossier. We need to organize this. I told Marcus, I do not want just spreadsheets. I want exhibits. I want a narrative that even my mother, who barely knows how to use an ATM, can understand. We spent the next 2 hours assembling the kill kit. We printed the bank statements highlighting the transfers to Vertex and Prism. We printed the corporate registry documents showing Tara's mother's maiden name. We printed the side-by-side comparison of the meat prices, the inflated invoices Gavin paid versus the market rate for the lower quality beef he was actually serving. I arranged the documents into 5 identical black binders, one for me, one for Gavin, one for Tara, one for my mother, and one for our family estate attorney, Mr. Henderson, whom I had called 30 minutes ago and asked to attend the meeting under the guise of witnessing the transfer. I needed witnesses. I needed an audience. Gavin thought he was walking into a surrender. He thought he would see his little sister, eyes red from crying, hands shaking as she signed away her birthright to save the family name. He was expecting an emotional breakdown. Instead, I was bringing him a felony indictment wrapped in a plastic binder. I went into the bathroom to fix my appearance. I splashed cold water on my face and reapplied my lipstick. I tied my hair back into a severe, tight bun. I put on the blazer I wore for contract disputes. Sharp, black, tailored. I looked in the mirror and searched for any trace of the little girl who used to look up to her big brother. The girl who used to sit on the kitchen counter while he made her grilled cheese sandwiches. She was gone. Gavin had killed her the moment he decided that a few $100,000 was worth more than our blood. I walked back into the main room. Marcus was packing his equipment into his aluminum case. "Are you ready?" he asked. I checked my watch. It was 11 o'clock. The lunch rush would be starting soon, but the back office would be quiet. "I am not just ready," I said, picking up the stack of binders. "I am eager." We checked out of the motel. The drive to the restaurant felt different this time. Yesterday, the road had felt like a path to a funeral. Today, it felt like the approach to a battleground. I drove with the windows down, letting the cold air sharpen my senses. When we pulled into the parking lot of the Jordan Oak, I saw Gavin's truck parked in its usual spot, taking up 2 spaces like he owned the pavement. Next to it was my mother's sedan. Good. He had brought her here to add pressure, to use her worry as a weapon against me. He wanted her to witness my capitulation. He had no idea he had just provided the most important witness for his own execution. I parked my car and turned to Marcus. "You stay quiet until I signal you," I instructed. "Let me drive the conversation. When I ask for the numbers, you present them. No commentary, just data." "Understood," Marcus said. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of wood smoke and frying onions coming from the vents, the smell of my childhood, the smell of my father's hard work. I grabbed the binders. We walked through the back entrance, bypassing the kitchen line. The staff was busy prepping for service, heads down, chopping and stirring. They did not notice the executioner walking past the walk-in fridge. We reached the heavy oak door of the office. I could hear voices inside. Gavin's voice was loud, confident, assuring someone, likely my mother, that everything would be over soon, that Ashlyn was going to do the right thing. I did not knock. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, Marcus following close behind like a shadow. The room went silent. Gavin was sitting behind the desk, looking every bit the weary commander. Tara was next to him, holding my mother's hand. Mr. Henderson, the family attorney, sat in the corner, looking uncomfortable. "Ashlyn," Gavin said, standing up. He tried to look relieved, but I saw the flicker of annoyance when he noticed Marcus. "Who is this?" "This is Marcus Thorne," I said, my voice steady and cool. "He is a forensic auditor." Gavin's face went pale, then immediately flushed red. "An auditor? Ashlyn, I told you we do not have time for this. The bank is waiting. We need to sign the papers now." I walked over to the large conference table pushed against the wall and dropped the stack of 5 black binders onto the wood. The sound was heavy, solid, final. "We are not signing anything." "Gavin," I said, sliding one binder toward him and another toward Mom. "What is this?" Tara asked, her voice trembling slightly. "This," I said, unbuttoning my blazer and taking a seat at the head of the table, "is the reason we are not closing the restaurant. And it is the reason why, by the end of this hour, you two are going to explain to Mom why her retirement fund is sitting in your personal bank account." Gavin stared at the binder like it was a bomb. In a way, it was, and I had just lit the fuse. For a moment, the only sound in the office was the hum of the industrial refrigerator vibrating through the walls. Gavin looked at the black binder in front of him as if it were a venomous snake coiled to strike. He did not open it. Instead, he looked up at me, his eyes narrowing into slits of pure defensive aggression. "Who is paying this guy?" Gavin demanded, pointing a shaking finger at Marcus. "Is this how you spend your money? Ashlyn, you hire some stranger to come in here and intimidate your own family while we are trying to save Dad's legacy?" He turned to our mother, his voice shifting instantly from anger to a wounded whine. "Mom, Tell her to send him away. This is a private family matter. We are 5 minutes away from losing the building, and she is playing lawyer games." My mother looked between us, her eyes wide and watery. She clutched her handbag to her chest, looking small and terrified. She had spent 40 years trusting the men in her life, first Dad, then Gavin. The idea that one of them could be wrong, or worse, malicious, was a concept she physically struggled to process. "Ashlyn." "Honey," she said, her voice trembling. "Maybe we should just listen to your brother. He has been so stressed. He knows what is best." I looked at my mother, and my heart broke a little, but I knew the only way to save her was to shatter the illusion she was clinging to. "He stays, Mom," I said softly but firmly, "because Gavin is not telling you the truth, and I'm not going to let him steal your house." "That is enough." Gavin slammed his hand on the desk. "Get out, both of you. I am the majority operator here, and I am ordering you off the property." "Actually, you are not," Mr. Henderson interrupted. We all turned to the family attorney. He was an older man, slow to speak, but when he did, he carried the weight of 3 decades of legal practice. He adjusted his glasses and looked at Gavin. "Until the papers are signed, Ashlyn is a 50% partner. Gavin, she has every right to be here, and she has every right to bring an auditor if she suspects financial irregularity." "Thank you, Mr. Henderson," I said. I sat down and opened my own binder. "I am not asking you to trust me. Gavin, I am asking you to look at the paper. Mom, open the binder, please." My mother hesitated, her hand trembling, but she slowly flipped the cover open. Tara sat frozen, her face pale, her eyes darting around the room as if looking for an exit. "Turn to page 3, I instructed. I waited until I heard the rustle of pages. "On the left side, you will see the profit and loss statement Gavin sent me yesterday." I began, my voice calm, stripping away all emotion. "It shows a net loss of $18,000 for last month. It shows that our food costs are 40% of our revenue. It paints a picture of a business that is dying." I paused, looking directly at Gavin. He was not looking at the binder. He was staring at me with a hatred so raw it made my skin prickle. "Now, look at the right side of the page," I continued. "This is the reconstruction based on the actual bank deposits and the market value of the inventory we are actually using." "What is this garbage?" Gavin spat. "You made this up." "The column on the right does not show a loss," I said, ignoring him. "It shows a net profit of $12,000 for the same month." $12,000? Mom whispered, looking at the numbers. "But Gavin said we could not pay the electric bill." "We can pay the electric bill." "Mom," I said, "we can pay it 10 times over. The restaurant is not failing. It is making money. It is making a lot of money." "Then where is it?" Tara snapped, her voice shrill and desperate. "If we are so rich, Ashlyn, why are we maxed out on our credit cards? Why is the bank calling?" "That is the question, isn't it?" I said. I flipped the page in my binder. "The money is leaving the account, Tara, but it is not going to the electric company, and it is not going to the beef supplier." I pointed to the highlighted section on page 4. "It is going here. Vertex Management Solutions, North Creek Logistics, Prism Creative Group." The room went deadly silent. I saw Tara's throat bob as she swallowed hard. She knew those names. Of course she knew them. "I have never heard of them," Mom said, confused. "You haven't," I said, "but Gavin has, and so has Tara." "That is a lie," Gavin shouted. "Those are consultants. Operational consultants. We had to hire outside help to try and turn the ship around. You do not understand how modern business works. Ashlyn, you sit in your ivory tower in Chicago and think you know how to run a restaurant in this economy? You need experts." "Experts?" I asked. I turned to page 5. "These experts charge $4,500 a month for management advice. Yet, the registered address for Vertex is a post office box. And Prism Creative Group?" I looked at Tara. "They charge us $2,000 a month for floral arrangements. Mom, Look around the office. Look at the dining room. Have you seen $2,000 worth of fresh flowers in here? Ever? Mom looked at the plastic fern gathering dust in the corner. She looked back at the page. No, she whispered. Gavin stood up so abruptly his chair tipped over backward with a loud crash. This is an ambush, he yelled, his face turning a blotchy purple. You are twisting everything. I hired those companies to rebrand us. It takes time to see results. You are trying to humiliate me in front of Mom because you are jealous that Dad left me in charge. I remained seated. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The truth was screaming loud enough for both of us. I am not jealous. Gavin, I am auditing. And here is the reality. The money you paid to Prism Creative Group went into a credit union account. I paused for effect. An account with your wife's name on it. Tara let out a small, strangled sob. Gavin froze. The air in the room felt heavy, suffocating, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Mom slowly turned her head to look at her son. Her expression was not angry. It was confused, hurt, and terrifyingly disappointed. Gavin? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Is that true? Gavin looked at Mom, then at me, then at the lawyer. He was cornered, and like a trapped animal, he decided to attack. You ungrateful little witch, he hissed at me, leaning over the table. I kept this place running. I was here every morning at 5. I dealt with the drunks, the health inspectors, the broken toilets. I deserve a salary that reflects that. So you stole it? I asked. I did not steal it. I took what I was owed, he screamed, and the confession hung in the air. Sharp and undeniable. Dad paid me peanuts for 20 years. He treated me like a glorified busboy. When he died, I decided I was going to pay myself what I was worth. There it was, the justification of every embezzler in history. Entitlement. So you manufactured a crisis, I said, connecting the final dot for Mom. You made the restaurant look like it was failing so I would sign over my half. You wanted to push me out so you could keep draining the accounts without me asking questions. You were going to let Mom think her husband's legacy was a failure just so you could buy a new truck? It is not about a truck. It is about respect, Gavin yelled, his eyes wild, but his shouting was losing its power. He looked small. He looked pathetic. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. The sound was dry and sharp. Gavin, he said, his tone devoid of any warmth, I advise you to stop speaking immediately. As the attorney for the estate, I must inform you that admitting to misappropriation of funds in front of witnesses is ill-advised. Gavin looked at the lawyer, stunned that his ally was stepping back. He looked at Tara, who was weeping silently into her hands. He looked at Mom, who was staring at the floor, unable to even look at him. I closed my binder. The meeting is over, Gavin, I said, standing up, and I am not signing anything. You have to. A desperation returning. The bank. The bank is not the problem. I cut him off. You are, and we are going to fix that. I motioned for Marcus to pack up. I took my mother's hand. Her skin was ice cold. Come on, Mom, I said. I am taking you home. We walked out of the office, leaving Gavin standing amidst the ruins of his own lies, the silence of the room deafening in its judgment. He did not follow us. He knew, just as I did, that the brother I had grown up with was gone. All that was left was a desperate man with a balance sheet full of crimes. Mr. Henderson raised a hand, stopping me before I could guide my mother out the door. We cannot leave yet. Ashlyn, he said, his voice grave. If what Gavin just admitted to is true, we are dealing with criminal liability that affects the entire estate. We need to establish the scope of this right now, before any assets can be moved or destroyed. I looked at my mother. She looked shattered, but she gave me a tiny, imperceptible nod. She needed to see the bottom of the well. We sat back down. Marcus, I said, signaling my auditor, show them the mechanics. Marcus opened the third binder, the one I had not touched yet. He did not speak with judgment. He spoke with the cold precision of a surgeon pointing out a tumor. "This is the invoice registry for Prism Creative Group," Marcus said, projecting a digital copy of a check onto the small screen he had set up on the credenza. He pointed to the signature line on the endorsement back. It was a digital stamp, but the routing number underneath it was undeniable. "It matches the joint checking account held by Gavin and Tara Jordan," Marcus explained. "Over the last 24 months, 38 separate payments were deposited here. The memo lines cite interior design, menu consultation, and seasonal decor." I turned my gaze to Tara. She was no longer looking at Gavin for support. She was staring at her hands, her fingernails digging into her palms. "Tara," I asked, keeping my voice low and direct, "did you design the menu?" She flinched. "No." "Did you source the furniture? Did you hang the seasonal lights? Did you provide any professional services that would justify a fee of $2,500 a month?" Tara bit her lip, her eyes filling with tears. She shook her head. "Speak up." "Tara," Mr. Henderson said sharply, "this is for the record." "No," she whispered. Gavin said we needed the money. He said the business could afford it and that nobody would notice. He told me it was just a way to reduce the tax burden." "So you signed invoices for work you never did?" I pressed. "Gavin told me to," she cried out, her voice cracking. "He said it was standard practice." "It is not standard practice." "Tara," I said, "it is embezzlement." "That is enough," Gavin roared, stepping between his wife and me. "Stop grilling her. She did nothing wrong. I am the one running this place. I am the one who makes the decisions." "And that is the problem, isn't it?" I said, looking up at him. "You made the decision to lie to Mom. You made the decision to tell us the restaurant was failing when it was actually thriving. Why, Gavin? If you wanted a raise, why didn't you just ask for it? We are partners. We could have discussed a salary increase." "Because you would have said no," Gavin shouted, his face twisting into a mask of ugly resentment. "You would have sat there with your fancy law degree and lectured me about profit margins. You have always been the smart one, haven't you? Ashlyn, the golden girl." This had nothing to do with profit margins. This was personal. The veneer of the concerned businessman had completely dissolved, revealing the jealous brother underneath. "I stayed here," Gavin continued, pacing the small room like a caged animal. "I stayed in this town while you went off to Chicago to play big-shot lawyer. I scrubbed the floors. I fixed the grease traps. I dealt with Dad's decline every single day. Do you know what it is like to watch him forget your name while you are trying to keep his business alive?" I felt a pang of guilt, sharp and sudden, but I pushed it down. Grief does not justify theft. "I know it was hard, Gavin," I said calmly, "but that does not give you the right to rob the estate." "I earned every penny," he spat back. "Dad paid for your college. He paid for your law school. That was hundreds of thousands of dollars. Ashlyn, what did I get? I got a job with 60-hour weeks and a pat on the back. This money, the money you call stealing, was my inheritance. I was just taking it early. I was leveling the playing field." The room fell silent again. The logic was twisted. But it was out in the open now. He did not see himself as a criminal. He saw himself as a victim collecting reparations. "So the restaurant isn't losing money?" Mom asked, her voice trembling. "The bankruptcy? It was all a lie?" "Yes, Mom," Gavin said, turning to her, his tone shifting to a desperate pleading. "But I had to do it. Don't you see? If the business looked profitable, Ashlyn would want her half of the profits. She would take money out of the town, out of the family, to buy expensive condos in the city. I wanted to keep the money here. I wanted to force her out so the restaurant would be ours. Mine and yours." "No," I corrected him. "Mine and yours? No. Gavin, you wanted it to be yours. You were willing to let Mom believe she was destitute just to get me to sign that paper. You were going to let her live in fear of losing her home just so you could own 100% of the shares." "That is not true," Gavin protested, but his eyes darted away. "It is true," I said. "I picked up the financial report again. If I had signed those papers today, you would have owned the land, the building, and the brand. And next year, When you miraculously turned a profit, you would have kept every dime. You were not protecting Mom. You were using her fear to manipulate me. Gavin opened his mouth to argue, but the contradiction choked him. He had claimed the restaurant was failing to scare us. Now he was claiming he stole the money because the restaurant was so successful he deserved a bigger cut. He could not have it both ways. Mr. Henderson closed his notebook. The sound was final. Gavin, the attorney said, his voice cold, you have just admitted to falsifying financial records, creating shell companies to divert funds, and attempting to defraud a business partner. Your justification regarding Ashlyn's education is legally irrelevant. I do not care about the law, Gavin screamed, slamming his fist into the wall. It is not fair. Why does she get everything? Why does she get the life, the money, the freedom, and I get stuck here flipping burgers? Because you chose to stay, Gavin, I said softly, and because instead of building something of your own, you decided to tear down what Dad built. I looked at my brother, really looked at him. The jealousy had eaten him alive. It had rotted him from the inside out until he could justify stealing from his own mother. There is nothing left to discuss, I said, standing up. The lie is over. Gavin slumped into his chair, the fight draining out of him as the reality of his confession settled in. He looked at Tara, but she turned her face away. He looked at Mom, but she was weeping silently, not for the money, but for the son she had lost to greed. You have destroyed your own credibility. Gavin, I said, you cannot run this place anymore, not because you are incompetent, but because nobody, not the staff, not the vendors, and certainly not your family, will ever trust a word you say again. He put his head in his hands. The silence that followed was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a structure collapsing, beam by beam, until only the dust remained. The silence that followed Gavin's confession did not last long. It was broken not by an apology, but by the desperate, clawing sound of a man trying to rebuild a collapsing dam with mud. You cannot tell anyone about this, Gavin said, his voice dropping to a frantic whisper. He leaned across the table, ignoring me and focusing entirely on our mother. Mom, listen to me. If this gets out, if Ashlyn drags this into a public court, it will destroy us. Not just me. Us. The family name. Dad's name. Do you want the neighbors reading about this in the Sunday paper? Do you want to walk into church on Sunday and have everyone whispering that your son is a thief? My mother looked at him, her eyes red and swollen. She was trembling, caught in the agonizing space between moral truth and social survival. In our small town, reputation was a currency as real as the dollars Gavin had stolen. We can fix this internally, Gavin pressed, sensing her hesitation. I will pay it back. I will set up a payment plan. We can restructure the loans, but we cannot let Ashlyn blow this up. It has to stay in this room. I watched the dynamic shift in real time. It was terrifyingly effective. Gavin was weaponizing my mother's fear of shame to shield himself from the consequences of his greed. He was gambling that she would choose peace over justice. Mom looked at me, her expression pleading. Ashlyn, maybe if he pays it back? We do not need the police involved, do we? We are family. I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. This was the trap. This was how toxic families survived for generations, by burying the rot under the floorboards and pretending the smell wasn't there. No, Mom, I said, my voice cutting through the fog of manipulation. I am not doing this. I am not going to be an accomplice to a felony just to keep the neighbors from gossiping. I turned to Gavin. You do not get to dictate terms anymore. Gavin, you lost that right when you forged the first invoice. I stood up, signaling to Marcus to close his briefcase. The click of the latches sounded like gunshots in the quiet room. Here is the deal, I said, looking down at my brother. I am not signing the transfer papers. That offer is dead. Instead, I am giving you a choice. You have 48 hours to resign as the operating manager of the Jordan Oak. You will hand over all keys, passwords, and bank access to an interim manager of my choosing. And if I don't? Gavin sneered, though there was no real power behind it. If you don't, I instructed Mr. Henderson to file a formal lawsuit for breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, and embezzlement on Monday morning, and I will attach the forensic audit as Exhibit A. It will become a matter of public record. The neighbors won't just whisper, Gavin. They will read the transcripts. Gavin turned pale. He knew I was not bluffing. He knew that in a courtroom, he would not just lose the restaurant, he would likely go to prison. You would send your own brother to jail? He asked, his voice shaking with a mix of fear and disbelief. I am not sending you anywhere, I replied. You sent yourself the moment you decided my inheritance was your personal piggy bank. I walked to the door, my heart pounding. I wanted to scream, to cry, to shake him until he understood the betrayal. But I held it together. I had to be the steel beam that kept the building from falling, even if everyone else hated me for it. Mom, are you coming? I asked. She looked at Gavin, then at me. She stayed seated. I need a minute with him, she whispered. I nodded. I understood. She needed to mourn the son she thought she had. I walked out of the office and into the kitchen corridor. The lunch rush was beginning. The air was thick with the smell of searing beef and garlic. As I passed the prep station, the noise of the kitchen seemed to dip. A young sous chef, a guy named Mike, who had worked there since he was 18, looked up from his cutting board. He caught my eye. He did not wave. He simply gave me a sharp, distinct nod. It was a look of recognition. My phone buzzed in my pocket as I pushed through the swinging doors into the parking lot. I checked the screen. It was a text from an unknown number. Thank you. We knew he was skimming. We were afraid the place would shut down. Don't let him back in. I got into my car and locked the doors. My hands were shaking now. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a hollow, aching exhaustion. The backlash began before I even made it back to the motel. My phone started ringing. It was my Aunt Linda, my father's younger sister. I let it go to voicemail. 2 minutes later, a text appeared. Your mother called me. She is hysterical. How could you be so cruel? Gavin made a mistake, but you do not destroy family. You are acting like a stranger. Fix this. I stared at the screen. Gavin made a mistake. That was the narrative already taking shape. $740,000 was not a mistake. It was a career. But to the family members who relied on the illusion of harmony, I was the villain. I was the one rocking the boat. They did not care about the truth. They cared about the comfort of the lie. Gavin began texting me a flurry of messages. The tone swung wildly from aggression to begging. You are killing Mom with this stress. I can pay you $10,000 a month. Just let me stay. If you file that lawsuit, I will tell everyone you abandoned Dad when he was sick. I blocked his number. It was the hardest thing I had ever done digitally. Blocking my brother felt like amputating a limb, but the infection was spreading too fast. I called my own lawyer in Chicago. Start the paperwork, I said, my voice raspy. I want a temporary restraining order on the business accounts. Freeze everything. He is going to try to drain what is left before Monday. Are you sure? Ashlyn? My lawyer asked. Once we ring this bell, you cannot unring it. I looked out the window at the gray sky. I thought about the text from the sous chef. I thought about the fake invoices. I thought about the dollar Gavin wanted to pay me for my birthright. I am sure, I said, he is not my partner anymore. He is a liability. As I hung up, I realized that I had won the battle for the truth, but the war for the family was just beginning. The line had been drawn. On one side were those who wanted to pretend everything was fine. On the other side was me, standing alone with the cold, hard numbers. And for the first time in my life, I did not care if I was alone. I just cared that I was right. I filed the lawsuit on Monday morning at exactly 9 o'clock. There was no fanfare, no dramatic music, just the quiet thud of the clerk stamping the date on the thick stack of documents. The filing was for breach of fiduciary duty, conversion of corporate assets, and fraud. Along with the complaint, my attorney filed an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order to freeze the operating accounts of the Jordan Oak. By noon, The judge had granted the order. The legal system moves slowly for justice, but it moves surprisingly fast when you have a forensic audit showing nearly $750,000 vanishing into thin air. Gavin did not take this lying down. He hired a lawyer, a man named Richard Sterling, who had a reputation in town for being loud, expensive, and particularly good at dragging out divorces. Sterling immediately filed a motion to dismiss, claiming that the audit was biased and that I was acting out of a personal vendetta to seize control of the family business. It was a standard delay tactic, designed to bleed me dry of legal fees and patience. Sterling sent a letter to my attorney filled with bluster. He claimed that the payments to the shell companies were legitimate proprietary business strategies and that my interference was causing the restaurant irreparable harm. He threatened a countersuit for defamation and tortious interference. I read the letter and laughed. It was the desperate thrashing of a man who knew he was drowning. They were trying to argue that purchasing phantom floral arrangements for $2,000 a month was a trade secret. Despite the strength of my case, I did not want a drawn-out war. Every day the accounts were frozen was a day the vendors did not get paid, and the staff worried about their paychecks. I needed to excise the tumor quickly so the patient could survive. I asked my lawyer to set up a settlement conference. We met in a neutral conference room downtown on Wednesday afternoon. The air conditioning was set too low, making the room feel like a meat locker. Gavin sat across from me, looking haggard. He had not shaved in days, and there were dark circles under his eyes. Tara was not there. Sterling sat next to him, tapping a gold pen on the mahogany table. "We are prepared to offer a settlement," I said, sliding a single sheet of paper across the table. Sterling put his hand over the paper before Gavin could read it. "We are listening," Sterling said. "Gavin resigns immediately," I stated, keeping my voice flat and professional. "He relinquishes all claims to the management of the Jordan Oak. He transfers his 50% ownership to me in exchange for the forgiveness of the debt he owes the company for the misappropriated funds. I will not seek criminal charges, and we will seal the record of the civil suit." Gavin pulled the paper out from under his lawyer's hand. He read it, his face flushing a deep, angry red. "You want me to walk away with nothing?" he asked, his voice rising. "After 20 years? You want to steal my half of the business?" "I am not stealing anything, Gavin," I replied. "You already took your half. You took $740,000. That is roughly the value of your equity share. I am just formalizing the cash out you already performed." "I am not signing this." Gavin slammed the paper down. "Mom won't let you do this. She knows I am the only one who can run that place. You think you can scare me with a few spreadsheets? I will fight you for every inch." I looked at him calmly. "I am trying to save you from prison. Gavin, if we go to trial, a jury will not look kindly on you stealing from your mother's retirement." "Let them look," he shouted. "I am not quitting." He stormed out of the room, Sterling trailing behind him, looking slightly less confident than his client. Gavin was banking on the idea that I would crumble. He thought that if he stalled long enough, I would get tired of the fight, or that my mother's tears would force me to back down. He still believed he was the indispensable patriarch of the family. He was wrong, and 24 hours later, the final pillar of his delusion collapsed. The bank called on Thursday morning. Ironically, the bank Gavin had used as a boogeyman to scare me was now the very entity that sealed his fate. When the court issued the freezing order on the accounts, it triggered an automatic review by the bank's risk management department. They pulled the files, they saw the forensic audit attached to the lawsuit, and most importantly, they saw that the financial statements Gavin had submitted to them for the last loan renewal did not match the actual cash flow. That is called bank fraud, and unlike me, the bank does not have a sentimental attachment to the Jordan family name. Mr. Henderson called me with the news. "Ashlyn, the bank just notified Sterling that they are accelerating the mortgage," he said, his voice urgent. "They are calling the entire note due immediately. They are citing material breach of contract due to fraudulent financial reporting." "What does that mean for us?" I asked. "It means unless the management changes and a remediation plan is in place by close of business Friday, they are going to foreclose. But here's the kicker. Ashlyn. They told Sterling they will not negotiate with Gavin. They flagged him as a high-risk individual. They will only talk to you. I hung up the phone and waited. I knew what would happen next. It took less than an hour. My phone rang. It was not Gavin. It was Sterling. The bluster was gone from his voice. "Ms. Jordan," he said, sounding tired, "my client would like to reconsider your settlement offer." I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the skyline of the small town I had left so many years ago. "The offer has changed." "Mr. Sterling," I said coldly. "Changed? But—" "Yesterday, the offer was a clean break," I interrupted. "Today, the bank is involved. So here are the new terms. Gavin resigns. He transfers his shares, but he also signs a confession of judgment acknowledging the debt. If he ever comes near the restaurant or tries to disparage the business publicly, I will enforce the judgment and garnish his future wages for the rest of his life." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "He has no choice, does he?" Sterling asked quietly. "No," I said, "he doesn't. The bank won't talk to him. If he doesn't sign, the restaurant closes. The assets are seized, and he still goes to jail for bank fraud. This is me throwing him a life preserver while he is drowning in the middle of the ocean. Have him at my office in an hour," I ordered. When Gavin walked into Mr. Henderson's office an hour later, he looked like a ghost. The arrogance was gone. The anger was gone. He looked small, defeated, and terrified. The reality of the bank's threat had finally pierced through his narcissism. He realized that the world did not revolve around his ego. He sat down and picked up the pen. He did not look at me. He signed the resignation letter. He signed the stock transfer. He signed the confession. When he finished, he pushed the papers across the desk. "Are you happy?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "You won. You took it all." I looked at the signature that officially ended his reign over our father's legacy. I felt no joy. I felt no triumph. I just felt the heavy exhaustion of a surgeon who had successfully amputated a gangrenous leg to save the patient. I did not take it. "Gavin," I said softly, "I just stopped you from burning it down." He stood up and walked out of the door without another word. I was now the sole owner of the Jordan Oak. The fraud was over. But as I looked at the pile of legal documents, I knew the hard work was just beginning. I had to rebuild a business, heal a family, and somehow explain to my mother why her son could never come back to the place he had called home. The morning after Gavin signed the papers, I walked into the Jordan Oak not as a visitor and not as a sister, but as the sole owner. The weight of the keys in my pocket felt significant, a physical reminder of the burden I had just wrestled away from my brother. I did not feel triumphant. I felt like a disaster relief coordinator arriving at a site after the hurricane had passed. The first thing I did was call a staff meeting. I stood in the dining room, looking at the faces of the servers, the cooks, and the dishwashers. They looked tired and wary. They had been working under a cloud of manufactured doom for months, told constantly that their jobs were hanging by a thread. I did not give a motivational speech. I gave them the truth. I told them that the restaurant was not closing. I told them that the financial issues were being resolved and that their paychecks were secure. I saw shoulders drop and tension leave the room. Then, I made my first executive decision. I picked up my phone and dialed a number on speaker so everyone could hear. When Sarah Miller answered, her voice was hesitant. "Sarah, it is Ashlyn," I said. "I am standing in the dining room with the whole team. I fired the manager yesterday. We need you back." There was a silence on the line, and then a soft, incredulous laugh. "When do you want me there?" she asked. The kitchen erupted in applause. Mike, the sous chef who had nodded to me in the hallway, actually cheered. That was the moment the tide turned. Bringing Sarah back was not just a staffing decision. It was a signal that the era of Gavin's gaslighting was over. For the next 2 weeks, I lived a double life. During the day, I was the interim operator of a steakhouse. At night, I was still a lawyer, working with Marcus to untangle the knot of financial ruin Gavin had tied. We canceled the contracts with Vertex Management Solutions, North Creek Logistics, and Prism Creative Group immediately. That single administrative action stopped the bleeding of nearly $11,000 a month. It was shocking to see how quickly the bank account stabilized once we simply stopped robbing it. I re-established the contract with our old local cattle rancher. The first night we served the original, high-quality prime rib again. The dining room was electric. The food tasted like it used to, rich, honest, and worth the price. My mother came in on a Friday night, 10 days after the confrontation. She had been quiet, retreating into herself. The betrayal had aged her. She sat in a booth near the back, watching the bustling room. I sat down across from her and slid a single sheet of paper onto the table. It was the profit and loss statement for the first week of clean operations. "What is this?" she asked, adjusting her glasses. "This is us." "Mom," I said, "this is 1 week without the shell companies." She looked at the bottom line. It was positive, strongly positive. "We made $3,000 in profit? In 1 week?" she asked, her voice filled with disbelief. "Yes," I said, "and that is after paying Sarah her new salary and paying the rancher the higher rate for the better beef." Mom ran her finger over the number. She did not smile. Instead, her eyes filled with tears. "He really was stealing it," she whispered. "I kept hoping. I kept telling myself maybe it was just a mistake. Maybe he just wasn't good at math. But this is clear." She looked up at me, and for the first time, I did not see the accusation of me being the cold daughter. I saw gratitude. "You saved the house," she said softly. "If you hadn't come home, if you had just signed, we would have lost everything." I finished for her. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. It was the first time she had touched me with genuine warmth since Dad died. Gavin did not take his exile well. He tried to call me 4 times. I did not answer. He showed up at my mother's house while I was there for Sunday dinner, standing in the driveway next to his truck, looking like a man who had lost his identity. I went outside to meet him. I did not let him come inside. "Ashlyn, please," he said. He looked thinner. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a frantic, pathetic energy. "I cannot get a job. Rumors are spreading. Everyone knows I was pushed out. They think I stole money." "You did steal money." "Gavin," I said, crossing my arms. I know," he stammered, "but I can fix it. Look, just let me come back as a consultant, or a floor manager. I won't touch the books. I promise. I just need to be here. This place is my life. I do not know who I am without the restaurant." I looked at him, and I felt a wave of pity. He was right. He had wrapped his entire sense of self around being the big man running the family business. Without it, he was empty. But pity is a dangerous emotion in business. "No," I said firmly. "Ashlyn, come on, we are family," he pleaded, stepping closer. "That is the only reason you are not in a cell right now," I said, my voice hard. "I gave you the ultimate mercy. Gavin, I let you walk away with a clean record. That was the gift. You do not get the job, too." "But what am I supposed to do?" he asked, his voice cracking. "You are going to have to start over." I said, "Like everyone else, go find a job where you are not the boss. Learn what it is like to earn a paycheck you actually worked for." He stared at me, searching for a crack in my armor, a sign of the little sister he used to manipulate. He found nothing. I turned and walked back into the house, closing the door firmly behind me. I heard his truck engine start a minute later, and then the sound of tires on gravel as he drove away. It hurt. Of course it hurt. But as I walked back into the kitchen where my mother was pouring tea, I realized that the pain was necessary. It was the pain of a bone being reset so it could heal straight. By the end of the month, the transformation was undeniable. The staff was smiling. The customers were raving. The bank had reviewed our new financials and officially rescinded the threat of foreclosure. I sat in the office, my office now, and looked at the clean desk. There were no hidden binders, no secret ledgers, just a business that was finally allowed to breathe. I was not going to stay forever. I had a life in Chicago. But I had set up a system that could run without me. Sarah was capable. Marcus would audit the books quarterly to ensure transparency. I would remain the owner, the guardian at the gate, checking the numbers from afar to make sure history never repeated itself. I had come home to save a restaurant, but I had done something much more important. I had broken a cycle of lies that had been suffocating my family for years. The restaurant was making money again, yes, but more importantly, for the first time in a long time, the price of success wasn't the truth. The final meeting took place 3 weeks later in the sterile, air-conditioned conference room of Mr. Henderson's law firm. This was not a negotiation regarding the restaurant operation. That battle was already won. This was the final settlement of our father's estate, the closing of the probate chapter that had been left open since his death. Gavin sat at the far end of the mahogany table. He looked deflated. A man whose ego had been punctured so many times there was nothing left but a saggy, resentful shell. He was there to sign the final release forms, officially acknowledging that his equity in the Jordan Oak had been transferred to me to satisfy the debt of $740,000 he had stolen. He picked up the pen, twirling it nervously between his fingers. "I am signing this. Ashlyn," he said, his voice raspy, "I am giving you the business, but I want to be clear about the house. When Mom passes, we still split the equity in the family home 50-50. That is the law. Dad left it to both of us." He was clinging to the last scrap of his inheritance. He assumed that even though he had pillaged the business, the personal estate was still protected territory. He thought he could rob the cash register and still sleep in the master bedroom. I looked at Mr. Henderson. The old lawyer adjusted his spectacles and placed a thick yellowed envelope on the table. It was sealed with red wax, the kind you rarely see anymore. "Actually, Gavin, there is one more thing we need to discuss," Mr. Henderson said, his voice grave. Gavin frowned. "What is that?" "This is a codicil to your father's will," Mr. Henderson explained. "He drafted it 5 years ago, shortly after he was diagnosed with the illness. He instructed me to keep it sealed and only open it under 2 specific conditions. 1, if he passed away, and 2, if an audit ever revealed financial irregularity in the business exceeding $10,000. The room went so quiet, I could hear the hum of the vending machine down the hall. Gavin's face drained of color. "A codicil?" he whispered. "What does it say?" Mr. Henderson broke the wax seal. The sound of the paper tearing was sharp and violent. He unfolded the document and began to read. "I, Robert Jordan, being of sound mind, hereby declare that the integrity of the family business is the cornerstone of my legacy. I have entrusted my son, Gavin, with its operation. However, trust must be verified. In the event that any beneficiary of this will is found to have misappropriated, embezzled, or fraudulently diverted assets from the Jordan Oak in excess of $10,000, that beneficiary shall be immediately and permanently disinherited from the remainder of my estate." Mr. Henderson looked up over the rim of the paper. "It continues," he said. "This disinheritance includes all real estate, personal property, and liquid assets. The forfeited share shall pass in its entirety to the remaining honest beneficiary." I stared at the document, feeling a lump form in my throat. Dad knew. He didn't know Gavin would steal, but he knew Gavin could. He knew my brother's weakness, his entitlement, and his jealousy. And he had built a trap door to protect the rest of the family if Gavin ever decided to pull the trigger. "This is a joke," Gavin stammered, standing up. His legs were shaking so hard he had to lean against the table. "Dad wouldn't do that. He loved me." "He loved honesty. Gavin," I said softly. "He built that restaurant on a handshake. He valued his name more than his money, and he knew that if you stole from the business, you were stealing from him." Mr. Henderson pushed the document toward Gavin. "The forensic audit you admitted to constitutes irrefutable proof of the condition being met," the lawyer stated. "By stealing $740,000, you triggered this clause. You do not own half the house. Gavin, as of this moment, you own nothing." Gavin looked at the paper. He looked at the signature. Our father's familiar. Loopy script. It was undeniable. He sank back into his chair, covering his face with his hands. A sound escaped him, a low, guttural moan of absolute defeat. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was the realization that his father had seen right through him from the grave. Dad had predicted this exact moment. "So I have nothing?" Gavin whispered through his fingers. "No restaurant, no house, nothing?" "You have your freedom," I said, my voice steady. "I am still not pressing criminal charges. That is the only inheritance you have left. The fact that you are not going to prison today." Mr. Henderson slid the final release across the table. "Sign it. Gavin," the lawyer said. "Acknowledge the disinheritance and we close the file. If you fight this, we go to court, the will becomes public record, and you go to jail for the fraud." Gavin picked up the pen again. His hand trembled so violently he could barely hold it. He signed his name. It was a messy, jagged scrawl, the signature of a man whose life had just collapsed under the weight of his own greed. He stood up, looking at me one last time. His eyes were red, filled with a mixture of hatred and shame. "You got it all, didn't you?" he said hoarsely. "I did not want it, Gavin," I replied. "I just wanted you to be the brother I thought you were." He turned and walked out of the room. He did not look back. He walked out of the law firm, out of the business, and out of our lives. I sat there for a long time in the silence. I looked at the signed documents. I looked at the codicil. I touched my father's signature. I did not feel happy. There was no urge to celebrate, no desire to pop champagne. Victory in a family war does not feel like winning. It feels like surviving a surgery. You are alive, and the disease is gone, but you are left with a scar that will ache when it rains. I stood up and walked to the window. Looking down at the street, I could see the sign of the Jordan Oak in the distance. The lights were on. The parking lot was starting to fill up for the dinner rush. Sarah was there. The team was there. My mother was safe in her home. I had done what I had to do. I had not sought revenge. I had simply refused to let the lie continue. I had refused to let a bully rewrite our history with a fraudulent pen. The restaurant would survive. The family would heal, eventually, and I would go back to Chicago, carrying the heavy knowledge that sometimes the hardest people to fight are the ones you love the most. But as I watched the sun set over the town my father built, I knew one thing for certain. The truth was expensive, but it was worth every single penny. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on Gavin's choices and whether you think the father was right to include that clause in his will. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Lila Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and press the hype button to help this story reach even more people.